All right, welcome to Alabama Gristmill. We've got an episode today about an ancient way of solving, not an ancient, I guess a pioneer way of solving disagreements. And it's a dueling and how dueling was in Alabama and the laws and the everything that's involved with it and how crazy those times were. I guess that's it. But first I want to say hello to my co-host, Anna Causey.
Hi, I'm glad to be here and talk about this interesting subject.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely became interesting or hit a lot of people's awareness with that play Hamilton that was about Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton and their famous duel. And we also have Alabama's got a nice connection with Aaron Burr. We did a podcast previously on that a few weeks back, about a month or so back, so you can check that out. We wanted to go more into detail about dueling in Alabama and the history of it and how some of the historic duels of Alabama.
There were some interesting ones, I tell you.
I imagine they were different. There were different dueling grounds and different locations where you actually could go to do the duels.
Oh, yeah, there were different dueling grounds and around the state of Alabama, and it just was a way of settling honor. You know, they fought it out, and some of them just got injured. Some people got killed. A lot of people got killed, but a lot of famous people in Alabama fought duels.
It was a legal way of solving issues, I know, at the time.
Well, it was illegal, really, because they weren't supposed to be doing it. But
it was illegal. Okay.
Well, after Aaron Burr and Hamilton, people began to look down on it a little bit, and they started making some laws a little bit. So, but people would avoid it, and I'll get into that in the story.
Yeah. Before we get into that, we want to just really say appreciate all the patrons out there and make a nod to that. We're approaching our second goal, which is once we have 250 patrons, we're going to send everybody a copy of the Alabama Footprints, the first Alabama Footprints book.
Yes, we're over halfway there now. So.
Yep. So let your friends know, and anybody you know that's interested in Alabama history, that we're creating a fun community here, and you can join by going to the AlabamaPioneers.com site, and there's a big button right there on the right hand side that says click to be a patron, or I want to be a patron, and it goes to help us out do these podcasts, the website, and all the other different projects we have in trying to create a living history, or at least a more accessible history of the state of Alabama.
Yeah, so where average citizens can be involved in speaking about the history in their family too, with interactive. I love it when we put up a story on the site and somebody says, well, that's my great great uncle, or that's my great great grandfather, or I remember that. That's nice, because they can add their own personal experience to it. And it really, we've got it through the paper program. We'll be able to do it a little bit more than we even do on Facebook.
Yeah, we do have a lot of projects that we're coming up that we're planning on in the future that we'll be excited to tell you about as we keep growing. So just remember that. Join to become a patron. Just go to the website, check us out, and get all the instructions there. But we'll let you go ahead and get into the story now because it's a good one. And I want to kind of get to it. So we'll go ahead and take care of it.
Dueling was kind of interesting. The play Hamilton's brought it out. I guess the most famous one we can talk about is the Hamilton and Burr duel, which took place July 11th, 1804. And since it got such publicity all over the country, it kind of made people think twice about dueling and maybe set up some laws to stop it. But it didn't really stop for a long while. And particularly in Alabama, it was a nice way of settling differences, especially when you were defending a man's honor. It didn't really stop until around 1861, when more stringent laws were in effect to stop the dueling. But back in the early days, in the primitive days of 1800s, dueling was the best way to settle the differences between people who were influential many times. An act made in the Mississippi Territory on November 11th, 1803, outlawed dueling, and it made it a felony, whether that took place in the territory or not. So you could go to another state, which many people did, and fight a duel and still be convicted of a felony if you came back to the Mississippi Territory. Officers of the law who refused to punish the offenders were also found guilty of a misdemeanor, which is really kind of unheard of. Here you're punishing the sheriff or the officer of the law in town because they didn't arrest the ones who were involved in the duel. Finally, when Alabama became a state, on December 17th, 1819, they outlawed dueling. They even said that all state officers had to take an oath that they would not promote or be involved in the duels. They were getting stricter about it at that time. It still persisted because that was a way of been a tradition for so long. And in 1831, they proposed an amendment to actually repeal the act against dueling, but it didn't get anywhere because there was too many people at that time beginning to think, well, dueling may not be the best thing to do. When the penal code was adopted in 1841 in Alabama, killing of a person in a duel was murder in the second degree, and he couldn't hold office anymore if anyone that was involved at any time in a duel. There were many historic duels that took place in Alabama, but most of them that were famous were between the influential people. Still, a number of duels were fought in Alabama, and even though they were not up from by Alabamians, because it was kind of a situation that if you had a fight or a disagreement with somebody, then you would go to the next state and fight the duel so you wouldn't be convicted, because you might be convicted in your own. But like I said, Alabama kind of got around that when they said even if you went to another state, you could be convicted of a felony. The Code of Honor ruled in antebellum South, and the slightest insult might rise to a duel, just a word or two dishonoring somebody, even or a wife or somebody else in the family, then that would be a reason to have a duel. Sometimes people were killed, sometimes not. Sometimes they were wounded, but there were many people who were killed over duels. The duels that were involved, though, involved influential men. It kind of got to be a problem because the legislature wanted to we wanted to elect some influential men to run the government, and they might have been involved in a duel in the past. So what they had to do, they had to keep coming up with, well, we'll make an exception for this person, or we'll make an exception for that person so they could run for office. And finally, the legislature just ruled out all duels that took place before July the 1st, 1845. And so if you'd been involved in one before then, you could still serve in office from then on if you would not be involved in any more. William Lowndes Yancey, the orator of the session, he was involved in several duels. The one that he was really involved in that became quite noteworthy, in which there was an exception granted for him, was the one he had with Daniel Sayre, who was the grandfather of Zelda Sayre. Zelda Sayre, if you don't know, was the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby. They evidently had a pretty severe duel back in the time, and he had to get granted an exception so he could serve as an officer. Some other people that got involved in them in Alabama history were William Rufus King with Major M.J. Keenan, and Governor Gabriel Moore with Collier, and William Lowndes Yancey with T.L. Clingman of North Carolina. So you see Yancey again was involved in one. But then all this came to an end. All these exceptions came to an end in July 1st, 1845, because at that point they could say, hey, it took place before then, so it doesn't count. Dueling grounds occurred in many different places, and many times they were by other people, because like I said before, many people who were influential and so forth didn't want to get caught in their own state, so they go to a neighboring state. That even happened in the Hamilton and Burr duel. Fort Mitchell on the border with Georgia was kind of a common dueling ground because it was good for Georgia, that people could run over and fight a duel and then run back to Georgia and hope nobody knew about it. So they take care of it that way. And at least 3 duels with fatal results were held there. Most were from people from out of state. Fort Mitchell was considered a good place to duel because it was a government reservation, and it would be considered neutral ground. It wasn't really Alabama ground. It was a federal ground. And so it could be good for Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. One famous duel was even fought on horseback in Shelby County, believe it or not. The place they fought the duel was at Mallory, which at that time was a railroad stop between Wilsonville and Childersburg. At the time that the duel was fought, an old fort was there, and I guess that's why they went there, like I said, trying to get in neutral territory to fight the duel. Here at Mallory, Captain James Walthall, a Confederate officer and father of a motion picture creator, Henry B. Walthall, and another ex-Confederate officer, Major Pitts, who had been friends for years, had some kind of argument, and they decided they'd fight a duel, but they were going to do it on horseback. So they had the friends, and they all came out to the public road, and they began firing at each other on horseback. Of course, it scared the horses to death, and so they started wheeling around on the road, and they didn't get very good shots at each other because the horses were upset. They kept firing at each other, and finally poor Pitt's horse got shot. Walther was out of cartridges, so he began reloading, and Pitts hollered out, "Hey, wait a minute, I don't have any more cartridges." And Walter hollered back, "Well, that's all right. I have plenty. Come get some from me." And so they were going to go ahead and continue fighting them on horseback, I guess, if they shared the cartridges. But it kind of got ridiculous, I guess, at that point. And one of Walter's friends convinced them that they had really served the honor and they should stop, and they didn't fire anymore. So that one wound up being okay, because at least they fought. And they felt like they were both vindicated. It was strange, to say the least, to have one fought on horseback. Another duel took place in Memphis, and it was between William A. Lake and Henry C. Chambers, who was the son of Dr. Chambers. He became the first United States Senator from Alabama. Both men at the time were residing in Mississippi and were candidates for Congress in 1863. I guess it was brought out of a political argument. I don't really know the reason for it all. A lot of them, you never find the reason for them. They were usually trivial matters. Anyway, Chambers selected Colonel Galloway as his friend in the duel, and Colonel Galloway is from Alabama. Lake chose Walter Brooks, who was another United States Senator and who's a friend of his. The first shot went by Lake's head, and a ball then passed through Chambers' goatee. It got so close. And they shot again, but they decided, hey, we're still not satisfied. So they decided, maybe we can still settle it by an argument. They argued for 2 hours. I guess they stopped and just stood around and tried to argue and tried to settle the difference, but they couldn't come to a conclusion. So 2 hours later, they decided they had to fight the duel again. And this time, they were not so lucky because Lake fell dead and shot in the head. You can see how it involved. These were senators, and people trying to run for political office. So it was a very common thing for him to do that. Colonel Galloway, by the way, from Alabama, I guess you could say the strangest duel that was ever fought in Alabama might have been the one that was fought in Montgomery County about the year 1839. It has even been recorded in a lot of history books. That was the one between Bushel W. Rodd, called Bush Bell, and John S. Bailey, who were two prominent citizens in Montgomery County. They selected a place 20 miles out of the city on a road just beyond Lion Creek, which at the time was a boundary line between the state of Alabama and the Indian Nation. I guess they got on that area so they felt like they could fight on more neutral territory. It was not a secret, though. Everybody knew about it. Everybody knew they were going to fight this big battle. They got big dueling pistols that they could find, the biggest ones they could find. The barrels were 10 inches long, and they kept practicing with them for days and days, and they were becoming really experts at it, shooting different objects far away and really hitting them on the target. So everybody thought, oh, they're going to both die in this thing because they were both so expert with it. But on the day, the principals and their seconds all arrived on time. All the friends showed up, so it was a crowd around. A physician even arrived. And when it was called 1, 2, 3, fire, they both fired at the same moment, but neither one was injured, which was kind of astonishing, knowing how good a shot both of them were. So they demanded another round, and still no one was hurt. And so they did it again. More rounds occurred, and still no one was injured. Not even a mark. Not even getting close. They continued round after round until about the 6th round. And the friends said, hey, wait a minute, this is just not working. You need to stop. But they said, no, we got to get it. We got to fight this duel. And they kept on. They fired a 7th round, and still no one was hurt, which was amazing, knowing how good a shot they were. And on the 8th round, Bailey received a wound in the fleshy part of his hip, but he still was ready to keep on fighting. So they said, we got to go again. I'm not injured enough. I can fight it out. So they did. This time, Bell received a bad wound on his thigh. So here they got both of them injured at this point. And the friends finally said, this is enough. You've gone through all these shots and it's just, you've got to stop. I guess they were kind of feeling poorly after that. They decided to go ahead and stop. And it took both men a long time to recover. But Bell later became sheriff of Montgomery County. And Bailey lived a long life and died as a respected citizen. It's really a strange situation, though. They were very, very lucky. I guess it was just not meant for them to die that day. But that's kind of the story, some stories of the dueling days of Alabama and what was going on in the past.
Well, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of this podcast. That was pretty fascinating about all the different ways that duels took place in Alabama and the history behind it. So it's good to hear that.
I especially like the last one when about what happened during it, because I don't, like I said, it just wasn't meant for them to die that day. So that somebody else probably had their hand in that episode.
That's true. Well, like we said, we've always got these stories on the podcast, but if you are interested, we do have the Alabama Footprints series of books where you can go get these stories and many of the others that we talk about, and even in more depth. And the Footprints are Alabama Footprints books. There's a series of 8 of them now, I believe.
Yes,
we have some more in the works.
We gotta get started on that get going on that 9th one so we can get some more out there. But
exactly.
I'm first going to try to put the 5 through 8. We got to get that into one volume like we do the first 4. A lot of people like that. They want the whole series, and they're just like, it's less expensive to buy them that way. Basically, get 4 books for the price of 1.
So check that out.
For the price of 3. I'm sorry.
Check that out on Amazon.com, and you can get those books there. So you can go get those now. If you want to be a patron, like we said before, you can get the first book by being a patron, and when we hit our first goal of 250 patrons. So
yeah, we made it easy on the website now too, that there's a category for patron articles, so you can read a lot of the articles directly from the website now. So I think that'll help a lot of people.
Just making it easier to find.
It is easier. I like things easier. Anything's easier.
Got to keep it simple.
That's right.
And because life's too complex as it is.
I know. So, the more technology you have, the more it seems to get complicated. And this was an easier way.
And if you got any questions, of course, send us an email at info@alabamapioneers.com, or you can go make a comment on the Facebook page. Communicate with us, let us know, and if you have any problems doing anything, we want to know so we can fix it and make it easy for you.
That's exactly right.
Well, that will go ahead and wrap this episode up, and we'll let Red Foley play us out again with Alabama Jubilee, and we'll see you next episode.
See you next episode.
Throws away his crutch and hollers, he let her go, oh honey.